Welcome back. My guest today is Todd Harrison, CIO of CB1. Welcome, Todd.
Hey, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. And yourself?
I can't complain, thank you.
Well, you've been a busy guy. You've been making some conversation on Twitter. Let's jump right into a tweet you made about cannabis prices. You think they're going down? Is that right?
Well, I think the price of cannabis, the flower, is going to go down over the course of the next however many years as entire continents come online, whether that's South America, whether that's Australia. The price of flower is going to go down, which is going to benefit anybody that's going to use flower, cannabis as an ingredient. Anybody who uses cannabinoids as an ingredient, which we think is going to be everybody, they're going to benefit as prices go down, as input costs go down, margins are going to get better.
Okay, so as more people come online, it's going to create increased competition. What does America look like? I know you're sitting there in the U.S. How quickly are we going to see some new states come online with cannabis? What do you think? Who's next?
I mean, there's a handful of states coming on 2020, but I think the states writ large is the story here. We look at cannabis as coming through in phases. The first phase of Cannabis 1.0, if you want to call it that, was Canadian cultivation, and certainly we've seen that play through. We think right now we're about to enter 2.0, which is going to be U.S. consumer packaged goods. We look at the .com parallel very much as a pathway going forward. So, NASDAQ from Y2K to 2002 dropped about 78% before starting on this, what is it now, 17-year, 900% rally. We think cannabis is where NASDAQ was in 2002 as we get ready for 2.0, which will be U.S. consumer packaged goods, and then ultimately 3.0, which will be biotech or efficacy-driven solutions.
Now, how much do you think the difference in the rules between, say, in Canada, you can't really brand cannabis the same way in the U.S. How important do you think that's going to be with the CPG market?
I mean, it's really everything. Canada's had all sorts of problems. The rollout through the provinces have been sloppy. Obviously, you saw what Aurora said this week about business plateauing, at least until 2.0. And now you have all these concerns about vape, which we can talk about, but certainly not helping sentiment for the group. But again, the next phase in our, through our lens is U.S. CPG. We got some news last night that we could very well see a vote for Senate banking, which would go a long way with the SAFE Act, rather. And certainly we think that there's a fair amount of asymmetric opportunities on the U.S. side as we get through this liquidity crunch.
What is efficacy-driven solutions 3.0? You mentioned that in one of your tweets.
Yeah, no, it's really delving down into the science. And I think right now, we talk a lot about how the endocannabinoid system, which helps to regulate neurotransmissions, was first discovered in the early 90s. I was graduating Syracuse University in 1991. They were discovering what the endocannabinoid system is, what it does, and the role it plays in the human body. And certainly the uptake has been somewhat muted through the years. Now we have a situation where we understand more and more about what the ECS, or the endocannabinoid system, does, but we're not just now starting to scratch the surface of the parallels between plant, people, and pets, and how the endocannabinoids that our body naturally produces can be supplemented over time with the cannabinoids that are found in cannabis. And as that goes through the clinical pipe, as that goes through clinical trials, a biotech pathway, we think you're going to see efficacious agility, as we like to say, across a number of indications over the course of the next few years. But that's phase 3. We've got to unpack phase 2 first.
And what do you think about liquidity over time? What are your thoughts?
I mean, listen, right now, in this past summer, and even still right now, I think the real issue is that there's been a fair amount of, an imbalance between supply and demand. You had a lot of paper coming online, insiders who were granted stock as these companies went public, all rushing to tap liquidity, whereas the dedicated funds in the space are by and large fully invested, and the marginal buyer has not come back yet after the third 45% drawdown for global cannabis in the last 2 years. So over the short term, liquidity drives prices. Over the medium to long term, fundamentals drive performance. And the liquidity crunch has created some pretty compelling multiples for U.S. names through our lens.
Okay, we're going to pull up another tweet. Once upon a time, NASDAQ lost 83% in 2+ years before it began a trek to new highs. Can you elaborate? What do you You have some speculations as to what's going to happen in cannabis?
I think cannabis right now is where NASDAQ was in 2002 after the 78% drawdown after the bubble burst. After Cannabis 1.0 burst in January of 2018, we're down about 73% for global cannabis. So I think there is a parallel there. I think the fangification of U.S. cannabis is upon us. If you look back and you harken back to the four horsemen of tech, which was Intel, Dell, Microsoft, and Cisco way back when. We think that's Curaleaf, Cresco, GTI, and Harvest right now. We have positions in those, and that's going to drive the beta. And on the other side, you got a fair amount of what we say alphabets, where we look at some of these MSOs, some of these U.S. paper that has just gotten crushed. Down as much as 70-80% in the last few months, and now you're buying stocks that are trading at about, in some cases, 1/2 of 2020 revenues. So we're buying growth at value, if not distressed multiples, and understanding the liquidity issue and the financing concerns. You see these through. We think they're going to do quite well.
Can I get your opinion on the new e-cigarette proposed ban, the vaping issue? Where do you think that's going to go?
Yeah, I mean, clearly we need regulations, we need standards. We have that system in place, or at least we have a system in place at the state level. I think, the real shame here is that the U.S. government, the federal government, doesn't recognize the difference between a legal market and a black market, whereas the legal market is going to be much more stringent with guidelines, and that's really, through our lens, this should really fast track regulations. This should fast track the federal government wanting to get ahead of these standards and regulations, because any health professional will tell you that given the option between vaping and combustion, vaping is healthier for you if you do it right. Most people don't understand that this is about the emulsification process. This is about cutting the cannabis for the viscosity for the vapes. It's not about the THC. It's not about the CBD. It's not about the cannabinoids. Cannabinoids are actually quite therapeutic for you. This is what happens between taking those cannabinoids out of the cannabis plant until it gets into a vape cartridge that you're inhaling, and that process. It needs to be regulated. It needs to be decriminalized or brought to the state level, where there can be regulations that are put in place that are going to make this safer. But banning it writ large is not the case. It's not the solution, I should say. And don't get me started about cigarettes, opioids, guns, or anything else that's out there causing a lot more damage than this.
Absolutely. Now, the FDA, it takes some time to get anything, banned. When do you think someone will, this regulation will pass, or what's the timeline we're looking at? Any ideas?
I have no idea. I just think that, it's very noisy, trying to balance the, quite honestly, what I'm trying to really assimilate here is, if we had some positive momentum into 2020 as an election year, if you had the potential for an executive action where the president might want to, pass the States Act or kick this to the state level, save face with his base, and remove this catalyst to come out and vote for his opponents, that's something that we see as potentially, we'll say, higher than conventional wisdom probabilities of happening. What we're trying to really assimilate is whether this vaping scare, to the uneducated eye or the uneducated mind, might be conflated with cannabis and might put a dent in that momentum going into next year. I think that's what the market's trying to figure out right now.
Makes sense. Let's talk a bit about stocks. Who are you watching? What do you like? And who should we keep an eye on?
I mean, again, we trade Canada, but we invest in the U.S., we invest in biotech, we invest in Australia. We talked about the four horsemen on the U.S. side. There's a number of names that are smaller MSOs that if they could figure out sort of their pathway through here, you're picking up growth paper at discount, if not distressed multiples. So there's a lot of mispriced merchandise in the U.S. I think that's where the value is. That's where the upside is for 2.0. But we're also looking at some of these biotech names and some of these Australian names.
Thanks so much for your time, Todd, and we'll do this again soon.
Yep, thank you.